Imagine, if you will, just a totally normal Tuesday morning. You step out your front door, the sun is shining, and you're just going about your day.
Right, just a regular day.
Yeah. Maybe you're walking down the street to grab a coffee.
Yeah.
Or, maybe you head into your local grocery store to pick up some milk and eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps later that afternoon, you decide to attend a peaceful protest at a nearby park. You are simply navigating your life and completely immersed in your own thoughts.
Like we all do.
Exactly. But what you are entirely unaware of is this visible net you are walking through. In those perfectly mundane moments, your unique facial geometry is being actively scanned.
And that means like the exact distance between your pupils?
Yes, the distance between your pupils, the specific curvature of your jawline, the microscopic depth of your cheekbones, all of it is being captured, cataloged, and instantly cross-referenced against these massive, sprawling digital databases.
By both government agencies and private corporations, I might add.
Right. And it represents a fundamental fracture in how we understand our own existence in public spaces. I mean, for all of human history, stepping into a crowd meant assuming a cloak of anonymity,
Yeah, you were just a face in the sea of humanity.
Exactly. Unless someone physically recognized you, your movements were untraceable. But that assumption of anonymity, it's now essentially a relic of the past. It's a complete illusion.
It really is.
And tearing away that illusion is exactly what we are going to do with you today. Welcome to this deep dive. We are thrilled to have you here, our fellow learner, as we unpack a stack of research that, quite frankly, feels like it was ripped straight out of a dystopian cyberpunk novel.
Yeah, it sounds like sci-fi, but
But it's not. Except everything we're going to discuss today is already deployed and operational right now. We are pulling from an extensive array of sources. We've got peer-reviewed academic papers from the Columbia Journal of Transnational Law.
great stuff in there.
Really dense, but great. We have hard-hitting investigative reports from the Markup and the Guardian, and a comprehensive suite of civil liberties bulletins from the ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Privacy International, and Human Rights Watch.
It's a massive stack of reading.
It is. And the overarching mission of this deep dive is to pull back the curtain on facial recognition technology, or FRT as it's often abbreviated.
We are definitely not just going to skim the surface here.
No way. We're going to break down the actual mechanics of how this technology functions under the hood. We will explore the systemic, deeply embedded biases written directly into the code itself.
Which is fascinating and terrifying.
Utterly terrifying. We'll uncover how it's being quietly, almost invisibly deployed in the aisles where you shop and the public squares where you gather. And finally, we'll examine the rapidly growing global legislative movement that is desperately fighting to regulate or, outright ban it.
Before we get deep into the weeds today, though, we do need a quick but crucial note.
Yes, absolutely, please.
The materials we're unpacking today, they touch on some highly charged real-world events. These sources explicitly analyze the policing of Black Lives Matter protests, the intricacies of the Trump administration's immigration policies, and various flashpoints of global political unrest.
Right. And we want to be crystal clear with you, the listener, that we are strictly acting as the messengers here.
Exactly.
We are not taking any political sides, nor are we endorsing any specific political movement or stance.
Mm-hmm.
Our sole objective is to impartially report the data, the historical facts, and the viewpoints exactly as they were investigated and presented by these researchers and civil rights organizations.
We're just unpacking the reality of the technology. That is a vital framing. Our focus is entirely on the synthesis and analysis of the provided texts, ensuring you get a complete, unvarnished picture of how these tools operate.
Spot on. All right, let's start at the very beginning. Because before we can really grasp why facial recognition is triggering such a massive global controversy, we need to understand the underlying mechanics.
How it actually works.
Right. We need to understand how a camera transforms from a dumb piece of glass and plastic that simply records light into an active calculating machine.
Yeah.
How did the camera actually wake up?
To understand that awakening, the sources trace the origins of the technology back much further than most people realize.
How far back are we talking?
All the way back to the 1960s.
Wait, really? The 60s?
Yeah. There was a computer scientist named Woody Bledsoe who is largely considered the pioneer of this whole field. But his method was, it was agonizingly manual.
Okay, set the scene for me.
Imagine a computer the size of a room, right? And Bledsoe is sitting at a primitive interface called a RAND tablet. He was literally using a specialized stylus to manually click on specific coordinates of a printed photograph.
So he's looking at a physical picture and clicking on it.
Exactly. He would click the center of the left pupil, then the right pupil, then the tip of the nose, then the corners of the mouth.
Oh my God.
He was manually inputting the distances between these facial features into the computer so it could attempt to calculate a rudimentary match.
That sounds mind-numbingly tedious. You're talking about a human being acting as the bridge between a piece of paper and a computer processor.
Yeah, he was plotting an agonizing game of connect the dots for every single face.
It had to be incredibly slow.
It was. And for decades, the entire field of facial recognition was essentially trapped by that manual bottleneck and the severe limitations of computing power at the time.
Because they just didn't have the juice.
Right. The dream of an automated system existed, sure, but the hardware and the data simply weren't there. But then, as the historical analysis in our sources details, we hit the 2010s.
Ah, the breakthrough.
Exactly. The technology experienced a massive exponential leap forward, driven by a convergence of three distinct technological revolutions.
Okay, let's break those three revolutions down, because this is where the modern era really begins. The first one is big data.
Huge one.
And this is fascinating because we, the public, actually provided the fuel for this revolution for free.
Without even knowing it.
Yeah. With the explosion of the internet and the rise of social media platforms, think the early days of Flick, Facebook, Instagram, and even dating apps, there were suddenly billions of high-resolution photos of human faces floating freely on the open web.
And researchers just grabbed them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Researchers and tech companies began aggressively scraping these platforms. They built unprecedented massive data sets containing millions of faces to train their new algorithms.
I mean, if you ever participated in a 10-year challenge on social media.
Oh, right, where you upload a photo of yourself from 2009 to 2019.
Yeah, if you did that, you were effectively doing free labor to train a facial recognition algorithm on how human faces age.
That is wildly unsettling when you think about it.
It really is. So that vast reservoir of scraped data is the first pillar. The second pillar is the architectural engine that processes that data. It's the development of deep convolutional neural networks, or CNNs.
CNNs.
Right. This is a specific type of artificial intelligence that is exceptionally adept at analyzing visual imagery. And then the third pillar is the hardware. The rise of superfast GPUs, or graphics processing units.
Which were originally just for video games, right?
Exactly. These chips, originally designed to render high-end video games, turned out to be perfectly suited for the massive parallel mathematical calculations required by these neural networks.
Okay, so you have the fuel, which is the billions of scraped selfies.
Yeah.
You have the engine, which is the convolutional neural network. And you have the horsepower, the GPUs.
That's the trifecta.
But how does that engine actually process the fuel? Like, how does a computer look at a digital photograph and know it's looking at a face? The sources explain this as a distinct two-step process: detection and then recognition.
Right, those are very different things to a computer.
Let's start with detection. I used to think of early machine learning as being like teaching someone to play darts while blindfolded, just trial and error until he hit the board. But a better analogy, especially for how these neural networks function, is to imagine a highly trained but incredibly narrow-minded sketch artist.
Okay, how so? Walk us through that sketch artist analogy.
Well, a digital image isn't a picture to a computer, right? It's just a massive grid of pixels. And each pixel is just a number representing brightness and color.
Just raw data.
Exactly.
Mm.
When the neural network first looks at that grid, it doesn't see a face. It just sees millions of numbers.
Yeah.
So the algorithm uses something called edge detection.
Edge detection.
It scans the numbers looking for sudden, sharp contrasts, like a sudden shift from light pixels to dark pixels. The sketch artist is basically looking for shadows. It finds the dark shadow of a pupil against the white of an eye, or the shadow cast by the bridge of a nose.
So it's looking for those boundaries.
Right. And at first, the system is terrible at this. It thinks a shadow on a crumpled piece of paper is a nose.
Which happens a lot in early AI.
But because it's processing millions of scraped photos at lightning speed, it adjusts its internal math every time it gets it wrong. Eventually, the sketch artist learns the universal abstract pattern of a human face: two dark regions for the eyes, a vertical region of varying contrast for the nose, and a horizontal dark region below that for the mouth.
That is a really highly accurate way to describe the mechanics of the CNN.
Thank you. And so that is detection. The camera basically says, ah, there's a face in this frame.
Right. It is mathematically locating the region of interest. But, as the sources point out, detection is merely the first step. Simply knowing a face is present does not tell the system who that face belongs to.
It just knows it's a human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the second step.
Mhm.
Recognition. Once the face is isolated, the algorithm goes to work measuring the specific geometry within that pattern.
Doing what Woody Bledsoe did, but instantly.
Yes, exactly. It calculates the precise microscopic distance between the pupils. It measures the angle from the cheekbone to the jaw. It measures the depth of the eye sockets. It takes all of those spatial measurements and translates that physical geometry into a mathematical formula. This is what the industry calls a vector, or a face print.
Okay, I want to pause on that term for a second, a face print, because I think it's crucial for you, the listener, to understand that the database isn't necessarily storing a JPEG image of your face.
Right, it's not a photo album.
It is storing a math equation. It's like a fingerprint, but constructed entirely of abstract numerical weights.
Precisely. It is a unique string of numbers that mathematically represents you, and only you, compared to all the other faces in the system's training data.
So when a live camera scans a crowd at, say, a train station,
It rapidly detects faces, generates these mathematical vectors for every single person walking by, and then instantly runs those numbers against a precompiled database of watch-listed vectors.
and if there's a match?
If the numbers match above a certain statistical threshold, the system triggers an alert.
Now, if you listen to the marketing pitches from the tech companies selling this software to police departments and retail chains, they make it sound like this math is infallible.
Oh, absolutely. They push the accuracy hard.
The sources cite historical tests conducted by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And admittedly, the NIST data from 2014 to 2018 showed an incredible leap in accuracy.
They did.
They ran tests matching faces against a massive database of 12 million photos, and the failure rate dropped from 4% all the way down to just 0.2%.
Which sounds amazing.
Right. When you hear a 99.8% success rate, it creates this powerful illusion of technological perfection.
The key word there, though, is illusion. Because as the technical analyses in our sources point out, those NIST tests represent the absolute most ideal, sterile conditions imaginable.
Like lab conditions.
Exactly. The algorithm is comparing a high-resolution, perfectly lit, forward-facing passport photo or mugshot against a database of other equally perfect, high-resolution photos.
Right. And last time I checked, the real world is not a controlled laboratory.
Definitely not.
I mean, what happens when you're walking to your car and it's raining? Or it's
Yeah.
dusk and the lighting is terrible?
Or you're looking down at your phone.
Yes. So the camera only sees the top of your head and your forehead. What if you're wearing a heavy winter scarf? The Guardian's reporting explicitly highlights that real-world deployment dramatically degrades the accuracy of these systems.
It really does.
Furthermore, I was fascinated to read that even the most advanced systems in the world still fundamentally struggle to tell identical twins apart.
Yeah, that's a known issue.
If the tech is so advanced, why does a twin break the system?
It breaks the system because of the very mechanics we just discussed. The algorithm is blindly calculating geometry. Identical twins, by definition, share identical or near identical underlying bone structure and facial geometry.
Oh, right. So the math is basically the same.
Exactly. The mathematical vectors generated for twin A and twin B are so statistically similar that the algorithm's confidence threshold simply cannot differentiate between them reliably.
Wow.
And when you compound that geometric similarity with real-world variables, like the bad lighting or obscured angles you mentioned, the algorithm has far less reliable data to work with.
So what does it do?
It's forced to extrapolate, it is forced to guess, and when an algorithm guesses, it generates false matches.
And before we move into the devastating consequences of those false matches, it's worth noting a brief but terrifying point made by the EFF and other privacy groups in our sources.
Which is?
Facial recognition is really just the beachhead. It's the tip of the spear for an entire industry of biometric surveillance. The cameras are evolving to look at much more than just the geometry of your face.
Yeah, the frontier of biometric tracking is expanding aggressively. The sources detail the active development of gait analysis, for example.
Gait analysis, meaning the way you walk.
Yes. This is technology that attempts to identify you not by your face, but by your unique walking stride.
That sounds almost impossible,
Yeah.
identifying someone just by how they walk down the street.
It is entirely possible because your stride is an incredibly complex physical signature influenced by your unique skeletal anatomy, your muscle distribution, your genetics, and even your personal habits.
So it's a biomechanical fingerprint.
Exactly. And beyond that, the industry is developing skin texture analysis, which uses high-resolution imaging to measure the micro distances between the pores and wrinkles on your skin.
Oh, that's incredibly invasive.
There is even vein recognition, which utilizes near-infrared light to penetrate the skin and map the unique, complex pattern of blood vessels in your face or hands.
What's the end goal there?
The goal is a persistent, multimodal tracking system where you cannot hide your identity simply by covering your face.
Okay, so we have this incredibly complex automated system that distills human beings into mathematical vectors. But here's the critical pivot for us today. What happens when the vast data sets used to teach the machine, those billions of scraped photos we talked about earlier, are fundamentally structurally skewed from the very first day of training?
This brings us to a massive section of our research today.
The bias written directly into the code.
This is arguably one of the most urgent and heavily documented issues across all the civil liberties and academic sources in our stack.
So how did the bias get in there in the first place?
Well, when the engineers were initially scraping the internet to build those massive training data sets, they weren't curating for diversity. They were just grabbing what was available.
Fast and cheap.
Right. And historically, the most readily available high-quality images of faces on the internet belonged predominantly to white men.
So the system learned what a face was by mostly looking at white guys.
Precisely. Because the neural network learned the very definition of a face by primarily analyzing white male geometry and lighting contrasts, it became phenomenally accurate at identifying them, but it became disastrously inaccurate for almost everyone else.
The demographics of this algorithmic error are, frankly, staggering. The sources explicitly detail how the technology systematically fails at a much higher rate for people with darker skin tones, and it fails at a higher rate for women.
Yes. Both groups see higher failure rates.
And if those two demographics intersect, like if you are a black woman, the technology's performance falls off a cliff. The sources cite official government reports indicating that false positive rates are 2 to 5 times higher for women than men.
And a false positive is when the machine wrongly declares, yes, this is the suspect we are looking for.
Right, an innocent person gets flagged. And the absolute highest error rates are reserved for black women.
The mechanics of why it fails on darker skin are actually directly tied to the edge detection we discussed earlier.
The sketch artist looking for shadows.
Exactly. If an algorithm is overwhelmingly trained on lighter skin, it learns to look for specific types of shadows and high contrast lighting to find the nose or the eyes.
Okay, I follow.
When presented with melanin-rich skin, especially in less than ideal real-world lighting, the algorithm struggles to find those high-contrast edges. It literally cannot map the geometry accurately, so its error rate skyrockets.
It makes total sense mathematically, even if the real-world result is awful.
And the bias extends beyond just skin tone and biological sex, too.
Oh.
The sources highlight fascinating research out of the University of Colorado Boulder. They tested leading facial recognition systems against images of genderqueer, non-binary, and transgender individuals.
I can imagine the systems did not handle that nuance well. What did the researchers find?
They found catastrophic failure rates.
Really? Just complete failure.
Yeah. Because these algorithms were built and trained on datasets that strictly enforced a rigid, traditional gender binary categorizing every face into a neat male or female bucket, the systems entirely lack the computational framework to accurately recognize or even process individuals whose facial presentation does not fit those strict historical parameters.
So the AI is fundamentally blinded by the limitations and biases of its own training data.
Yes.
Now, this isn't just an interesting glitch on a computer screen in a lab. The real-world human toll of this bias is devastating. To demonstrate just how flawed the software could be, the ACLU conducted a highly publicized audit of Amazon's proprietary facial recognition software, which is called Recognition with a K.
Yes, the recognition audit was a watershed moment in the public understanding of algorithmic bias.
So here's what they did. The ACLU took the official high-quality headshots of all the sitting members of the United States Congress. They fed those headshots into Amazon software and told the system to compare the politicians to a massive database of public mugshots of arrested individuals.
And the results were embarrassing for Amazon.
Oh, completely. The software generated false matches for 28 different members of Congress, officially flagging them as criminals. But here's the critical data point.
What's that?
At the time of the test, people of color made up only 20% of Congress, yet they accounted for nearly 40% of the false algorithmic matches.
Wow.
The racial bias wasn't theoretical, it was mathematically proven in the output.
And while the ACLU test was a controlled demonstration, the sources detail horrifying instances where this exact same algorithmic failure resulted in actual citizens losing their freedom.
Yes, let's talk about the human cost.
The texts document several specific, high-profile cases of false arrests driven entirely by flawed facial recognition matches. Men like Robert Williams, Michael Oliver, and Niger Parks.
Real people whose lives were upended.
All three are black men who were arrested, handcuffed, and jailed for crimes they absolutely did not commit, solely because an algorithm failed to accurately process the geometry of their darker skin tones and match them to grainy surveillance photos of entirely different people.
Let's actually look closer at the Robert Williams case,
Oh.
because reading the narrative in these sources, it makes my blood boil. It perfectly illustrates the danger of treating a machine's output as infallible gospel.
It's a textbook case of technology gone wrong.
So, Robert Williams was just at home. He's pulling into his driveway, and police officers arrive, arrest him on his front lawn in broad daylight, in front of his wife and his 2 young daughters.
Just a traumatic experience from the start.
Completely.
Yep.
They take him to a Detroit detention center. He's held overnight for roughly 30 hours, entirely confused about what is happening. Finally, 2 detectives bring him into an interrogation room.
And this is where the tech comes in.
Right. They put a piece of paper on the table. A grainy still image from a surveillance video of a man stealing watches from Shinola's store. The detective points to the photo and asks Williams, "Is this you?" And Williams looks at it, holds it up to his face, says, "No, this is not me. You think all black men look alike."
Which is a heartbreaking thing to have to say.
It is, and it was in that exact moment, according to the reports, that the detective looked at the photo, looked at Williams, and realized the computer was completely wrong.
The human eye saw what the AI missed.
Exactly. The machine had made a mathematical error, the police had blindly trusted the math without doing basic corroborating detective work, and an innocent man's life was turned upside down.
It's inexcusable.
The sources even document another horrific case where an 8-month pregnant black woman was arrested for a carjacking she had absolutely no connection to, again, based solely on a false facial recognition hit. The trauma inflicted by these algorithmic failures is profound.
The trauma is immense, yes. And it stems from a systemic over-reliance on the perceived objectivity of technology.
The idea that computers can't be racist.
Right. Law enforcement often assumes that because a computer generated the match, it must be free of human bias. But we know the bias is baked into the math, and it's not just about racial bias either. Sometimes the algorithm just latches onto the wrong geometric patterns entirely. The Guardian's reporting provides a fascinating, if troubling, example from the United Kingdom.
Right, the Neophase deployment.
Yes. During police trials in South Wales, authorities deployed a system called Neophase to scan crowds entering major rugby matches.
And the researchers discovered a phenomenon they called the lambs.
Exactly. The lambs. The system repeatedly triggered high alert alarms for one specific woman in the crowd. Over the course of the deployment, the software flagged her 10 separate times.
10 times in one event.
Yes, violently insisting this is the person on your criminal watch list. But upon physical review, none of those 10 alerts were actually her. She was not the suspect.
So why did it keep flagging her?
Well, researchers dubbed individuals like her lambs, people whose facial geometry is just average or common enough that the algorithm constantly becomes confused and misidentifies them. She essentially had a mathematically generic face, and the software punished her for it by constantly treating her as a suspect.
Okay, I want to stop right here, because I'm wrestling with a concept that I think anyone listening to this might be wrestling with right now.
Okay, lay it out.
We've established that the root of the problem, the reason Robert Williams was arrested, the reason the system fails women of color, is that the training data sets were heavily skewed toward white men, right?
Yes, that's the technical root.
The code is functionally racist and sexist because the data was bad. So my logical brain says, why don't the developers just fix it?
Ah, the technical fix argument.
Yeah. Can't the tech giants just aggressively feed the neural networks? Millions of diverse photos, more black faces, more Asian faces, more women, more non-binary individuals, until the math evens out, the error rates drop to 0 for everyone, and the bias disappears. Isn't fixing the code the solution?
It is the most common, intuitive question to ask. But the experts, researchers, and civil rights advocates cited throughout our sources push back against that idea forcefully.
Really?
They argue that hyper-focusing on diversifying data sets to achieve perfect algorithmic accuracy is not a cure-all. In fact, they argue it misses the fundamental sociological danger entirely.
I am having a hard time wrapping my head around this. If the software is racist because it fails on black faces, isn't the most anti-racist thing we can do to fix the code so it works perfectly on black faces?
It seems that way until you separate technological bias from systemic bias.
Okay, explain the difference.
Technology does not operate in a sterile vacuum. It is deployed within the messy, complex reality of human societies, societies that are built upon generations of existing structural inequalities. The profound argument made in the sources is this. Even if you could wave a magic wand tomorrow and create a biologically flawless facial recognition system, one that works with 100% accuracy on every skin tone, every gender, in any lighting condition, deploying that perfect system into our current flawed society might actually make the oppression worse.
Walk me through that. How does a perfectly accurate machine make things worse?
Let's use law enforcement as the primary example, as the civil liberties groups do. Historically, marginalized communities and lower-income neighborhoods often face disproportionately higher rates of physical policing, surveillance, and stop-and-frisk tactics compared to affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods.
That's a well-documented reality.
Right. So if you take this historically over-policed community and introduce a flawlessly accurate, automated biometric surveillance tool, you are not eliminating the societal bias, you are simply automating it.
Oh, wow. I see.
You are scaling it up. You are making it vastly cheaper and vastly more efficient for the state to track, monitor, and target those exact same marginalized populations. You aren't fixing the broken system. You are supercharging it with perfect technology.
It's the concept of efficient oppression.
Exactly. The goal shouldn't necessarily be to make the surveillance weapon work perfectly on everyone. The goal, according to these privacy advocates, should be questioning whether the weapon should be deployed in public spaces at all.
That is a deeply unsettling paradigm shift. It's not just about debugging the code. It's about analyzing how that code is wielded as a tool of power.
Precisely.
And that transition brings us to the next major pillar of our deep dive today. Because whether the algorithms are deeply flawed or whether they are slowly becoming perfectly efficient tracking tools, governments around the world are aggressively rolling them out right now.
They are not waiting for perfection.
No, they are not. And according to the academic and investigative sources we are looking at, the era of blending into the background, the true anonymity of the crowd that we talked about at the top of the show, is effectively over.
It is a radical transformation of the social contract. For generations, citizens understood that venturing into public space meant being seen, but not necessarily known.
Right. I can see you on the bus, but I don't know your name or where you work.
Exactly. But facial recognition technology obliterates that distinction. To illustrate the sheer scale of this deployment, we can look at the landmark report from Georgetown Law cited in our materials.
I remember reading this. The numbers are wild.
Their researchers dug deep into state and federal databases and arrived at a staggering mathematical conclusion. 1 in 2 American adults is currently sitting inside a facial recognition network.
Half the adult population of the United States.
Exactly. That equates to roughly 117 million people who are effectively enrolled in a perpetual digital 24/7 police lineup.
And the vast majority of them never consented to be there and have never committed a crime. How does that happen? How do 117 million innocent people end up in a surveillance database?
Primarily through the Department of Motor Vehicles.
The DMV.
Yes. Many states have quietly opened their massive repositories of driver's license and state ID photos to law enforcement agencies, allowing police to run facial recognition scans against the faces of everyday citizens who simply went to the DMV to get their license renewed.
That is wild. The public infrastructure was repurposed for mass surveillance without broad public debate.
That's exactly what happened.
And we are seeing exactly how this perpetual lineup is being utilized on the ground, particularly when it comes to the policing of public protests.
Which is a very sensitive topic.
It is. Now, I want to quickly reiterate our impartiality disclaimer here for you, the listener. The source materials explicitly analyze the surveillance of Black Lives Matter protests and other political demonstrations. We are simply reporting the facts and the technological deployments as documented by human rights organizations and legal journals without endorsing any underlying political movement. We are just looking at the mechanics of state power.
Understood. A prime example highlighted in the sources is the case of Derek Ingram, a prominent Black Lives Matter activist in New York City.
What happened to him?
Following his attendance at a protest, law enforcement actively utilized facial recognition technology to identify him from protest footage, cross-reference his identity, and track him to his specific residence.
And the Columbia Journal of Transnational Law offers a brilliant, if terrifying, analysis of cases like this. They explore the legal and psychological concept of the chilling effect.
The chilling effect is crucial to understand.
Right. The core insight here is that an authoritarian government, or even an overzealous police department, doesn't actually need to use facial recognition every single day on every single citizen to successfully suppress free speech and assembly.
That is the insidious nature of the panopticon. The chilling effect relies entirely on the potential of surveillance.
The fear of being watched.
Exactly. If citizens are aware that the biometric infrastructure exists, and they know that attending a political rally or a controversial protest means their face could be automatically scanned, permanently matched to their identity, and stored indefinitely in a government database, many people will simply calculate that the risk is too high.
They will choose to stay home.
Right. The mere existence or even the rumor of the technology actively suppresses public gathering, freedom of association, and political dissent. You do not have to actively arrest thousands of people to crush a protest movement. You just have to make them deeply afraid of being individually identified.
And this isn't just a theoretical legal concern debated in the United States. The sources provide a harrowing global tour of how this technology is actively being weaponized right now across different political systems.
The international examples are really striking.
Let's dig into some of these case studies, because the physical pushback is incredible. Look at what happened during the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong.
The 2019 and 2020 protests in Hong Kong provided a visceral, real-time look at the struggle for anonymity. The protesters were acutely aware that the city was blanketed in smart CCTV cameras equipped with facial recognition capabilities.
So they knew they were being watched.
Oh, absolutely. So they rapidly adapted their tactics. The umbrella became a symbol of the protest, not just for weather, but as a physical shield against overhead cameras.
That's incredibly resourceful.
It was. Activists began universally wearing surgical masks, bandanas, and respirators, specifically to deny the algorithms the geometric data they needed. They even went so far as to physically attack the infrastructure, using ropes and tools to tear down state-operated smart lampposts that they suspected housed facial recognition hardware.
It became an arms race between the citizens and the state's algorithms. And how did the Hong Kong government counter that?
The government responded with a blunt legal instrument. They enacted sweeping emergency mask bans.
They made it illegal to hide your face.
Yes, they made it a criminal offense to wear face coverings that could obscure your identity during a public gathering, radically raising the legal stakes for anyone attempting to maintain their anonymity while voicing dissent.
Wow. The pushback against the algorithms gets even more creative when we look at Russia.
Yes, the Russian case is fascinating.
The sources detail how the government in Moscow utilizes an incredibly dense, widespread facial recognition network to automatically collect data on peaceful protesters and opposition figures. But activists in Russia have tried to fight back using a specialized technique called CV dazzle.
CV dazzle?
I had never heard of this before reading these sources, but it is visually stunning. What exactly is CV dazzle?
CV dazzle, which stands for computer vision dazzle, is a fascinating intersection of fashion, art, and counter-surveillance. It involves applying specialized, highly contrasting camouflage makeup and utilizing asymmetrical hairstyling techniques.
So face paint.
Yeah, but very specific face paint. Instead of trying to blend in, you are aggressively altering your facial topography. You might paint bold, black geometric shapes across your cheeks, or use stark white lines intersecting across the bridge of your nose.
Why does that work? How does looking like a cyberpunk extra defeat a supercomputer?
It works because it directly exploits the edge detection mechanics of the convolutional neural network we discussed earlier.
Oh, the sketch artist again.
Exactly. The algorithm is hunting for the expected universal symmetry of the human face, the expected shadows around the eyes, the symmetrical lines of the nose. By painting asymmetrical, high-contrast geometric shapes, you create artificial edges that confuse the system.
It is so clever.
The algorithm cannot distinguish between the painted shape and an actual facial feature, effectively breaking its ability to detect the face altogether. It renders the individual digitally invisible to the machine, even while they are highly conspicuous to the human eye.
It is brilliant digital camouflage. But while activists in Russia and Hong Kong are finding ways to fight back, the situation described in Myanmar sounds incredibly dire.
It is a worst-case scenario of unchecked biometric surveillance. Human Rights Watch reports extensively on the actions of the military junta in Myanmar.
What are they doing?
Following the military coup, the junta aggressively rolled out a Safe City initiative. This program relies heavily on a massive influx of advanced camera systems provided by the Chinese tech giant Huawei. These cameras are deeply integrated with AI, capable of simultaneous, wide-scale facial recognition and automated license plate scanning.
A massive dragnet.
And crucially, upon taking power, the military junta actively suspended the country's basic privacy laws, removing any lingering legal requirements for court orders or judicial oversight regarding surveillance. They are utilizing this massive, unregulated technological dragnet specifically to track the movements, associations, and physical locations of anti-coup activists and political opponents.
It is the ultimate tool for absolute authoritarian control. But before anyone listening thinks this is only an issue in authoritarian regimes or massive geopolitical flashpoints, our sources highlight incredibly concerning deployments happening right now in Western democracies.
Yes, Europe is not immune to this.
What is happening in Greece?
In Greece, Human Rights Watch details the rollout of a controversial smart policing program. Notably, this program is heavily funded by the European Union and built in partnership with a telecommunications company called Intracom Telecom.
Okay, what does the program actually do?
The initiative involves arming police officers on the street with ruggedized, handheld smart devices. These devices empower officers to stop individuals, scan their faces, and capture their fingerprints, and then instantly cross-check that biometric data in real time against roughly 20 different national and international police and immigration databases.
And the primary concern raised by civil liberties groups there is the exacerbation of racial profiling, correct?
Yes, absolutely. The civil liberties argument is deeply rooted in context. In Greece, reports indicate that police already engage in frequent, arbitrary stops of migrants, refugees, and marginalized groups to check their documentation, often without reasonable suspicion.
So the tech just makes that easier.
The fear articulated in the sources is that handing officers a powerful, tech-driven biometric scanner will not reduce bias, but will drastically increase the frequency and efficiency of discriminatory stops. It effectively transforms every single police officer into a walking, high-tech surveillance checkpoint, disproportionately impacting vulnerable populations.
And to cap off this global tour, we have to talk about the United Kingdom. The sources dive into the deployment of live, real-time facial recognition by the Metropolitan Police in London, specifically highlighting its use during massive public events like the coronation of King Charles.
The coronation deployment was widely criticized.
When you look at the data from those deployments, what stands out to you the most?
What is most staggering, and what the sources repeatedly emphasize, is the sheer, undeniable inaccuracy of these live, open-air deployments. Unlike scanning a static database, live facial recognition attempts to match faces in a moving, chaotic crowd in real time.
Which is much harder for the algorithm.
Much harder. The sources report that during various trials and deployments, the Met Police's system generated a horrifying 96% false positive rate.
Let me just repeat that number so it sinks in for you listening. 96%. That means that almost every single time the system threw up a red flag, sounded an alarm, and told an officer we found a dangerous suspect, the computer was entirely objectively wrong.
Correct. 9.5 times out of 10, it was pointing at an innocent person. And this mathematical failure leads to profound real-world indignity.
Right, because the police have to act on those alerts.
Yes. The sources highlight a specific, deeply troubling incident where a 14-year-old black schoolboy, simply walking down the street in his school uniform, was misidentified by the live facial recognition system.
A kid just walking to school.
Based solely on that algorithmic error, he was stopped by officers, surrounded, and wrongly fingerprinted on the sidewalk in front of the public. It is a severe violation of a child's privacy and dignity, driven entirely by a machine making a bad guess.
So we've painted a pretty bleak, extensive picture of how governments and police forces are wielding this technology. But here is where the narrative takes a sharp, unexpected twist.
The pivot to the private sector?
Exactly. It is really easy for us to focus all our anxiety on the government, the military, and the police. But the stark reality found in the investigative reporting from the ACLU and others is that you are just as likely to have your face scanned categorized, and secretly tracked while you were just out buying a gallon of milk or a new pair of shoes.
It's happening everywhere.
Let's transition into the private sector dragnet. How have local retail stores quietly weaponized this exact same technology?
The ACLU has coined a perfect term for this phenomenon: the retail panopticon.
A retail panopticon. I love that, in a terrifying way.
Through extensive investigations, they discovered that major everyday retail chains brands you recognize, like Wegmans, Macy's, and Rite Aid, have been aggressively deploying facial recognition software on their own customers.
And their justification is that they are trying to spot persons of interest or organize retail theft rings, right?
That is the corporate justification, yes, loss prevention. These retailers build their own internal proprietary databases of individuals who have been previously accused of shoplifting, or who have caused disruptions in the store, or who they simply deem suspicious.
So they have their own private watch lists.
Yes. The cameras positioned at the entrances automatically scan the geometric faceprint of every single shopper who walks through the sliding glass doors, comparing them in real time against this internal blacklist.
It's essentially getting a permanent digital ban from your local supermarket because an algorithm mistook you for someone who stole a razor blade 3 years ago. And as we have exhaustively established, these algorithms make mistakes constantly.
They make severe documented mistakes. The deployment by Rite Aid was actually so reckless that it triggered federal intervention.
The FTC got involved, right?
Yes, the Federal Trade Commission launched an investigation and found that Rite Aid's facial recognition program was deeply flawed. The system routinely generated false positives, disproportionately misidentifying women and people of color as shoplifters, leading to employees confronting and humiliating innocent customers.
Just horrible customer service, aside from the civil rights violations.
The FTC found the failures so egregious that they legally banned Rite Aid from using facial recognition technology entirely for 5 full years.
Wow. The sources also detail a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit filed against Apple regarding this exact issue. A teenager from New York named Usman Ba sued the company. What happened to him?
The Usman Ba case is a perfect storm of human error and algorithmic failure. According to the legal complaint, a third-party security firm used facial recognition software that falsely linked Ba's name and identity to surveillance footage of a chronic serial shoplifter hitting Apple stores.
Wait, how did it link his name to the thief's face?
Well, the actual thief had apparently stolen Ba's physical learner's permit. When the thief was briefly caught or confronted previously, he presented the stolen permit as ID. The facial recognition system then permanently attached the name Usman Ba to the geometric faceprint of the actual thief.
Oh, wow. So the system married the innocent kid's name to the criminal's face.
Exactly. So later, when the thief entered another store and the cameras recognized his face, the system spit out an arrest warrant for Usman Ba. Police arrived at Ba's home in New York to arrest him.
Over a stolen learner's permit.
Upon seeing him in person, the officers quickly realized he looked absolutely nothing like the tall, older man in the surveillance video. But the algorithmic error had already triggered the traumatic ordeal of police raiding his home. It vividly illustrates how dangerous it becomes when private companies act as judge, jury, and digital executioner based on black box software.
But the ACLU points out an even darker, more systemic implication of these retail watch lists. They call it the law enforcement loophole. And this is where the line between private corporate security and government mass surveillance completely dissolves.
This is a critical structural vulnerability in how privacy laws currently operate. Retail stores do not just populate their facial recognition systems with their own internal lists of accused shoplifters. They also routinely accept what are known as BELO lists directly from local law enforcement.
BELO meaning be on the lookout.
Correct. The police can hand a retailer digital photos of suspects they are searching for, or individuals with outstanding warrants. The retailer willingly uploads those photos into their private facial recognition system.
And then what?
Now, if that targeted individual walks into the grocery store to buy bread, the store's private cameras flag them, the system alerts the store manager, and the manager calls the police.
So why exactly does the ACLU view this cooperation as a dangerous loophole? It sounds like police just doing police work.
Because it inadvertently creates a shadowy, entirely unregulated, nationwide surveillance dragnet. Think about the scale. If thousands of retail stores across the country, grocery chains, pharmacies, hardware stores, are quietly running government-supplied watch lists through their private camera networks, The government effectively gains a mass surveillance apparatus without ever having to pass a law, secure public funding, face voter scrutiny, or physically install a single camera themselves.
They are crowdsourcing the surveillance state to the private sector.
Exactly. The ACLU specifically raises the alarm that this vast private infrastructure could easily be utilized for aggressive immigration enforcement by agencies like ICE, allowing them to track undocumented individuals simply trying to buy groceries.
It is the ultimate backdoor,
Right.
outsourcing the panopticon. And the sources draw a very clear parallel between this retail loophole and the controversy surrounding flock cameras. What is the flock system?
Flock Safety is a rapidly growing private company that manufactures automated license plate reader, or ALPR, cameras. They sell these sophisticated cameras to homeowners associations, private neighborhoods, and local police departments.
I've seen those on telephone poles.
Yeah, they sit on poles and constantly scan, record, and database the license plates of every single car that drives past. The intense controversy arises because local police departments using the flock system have frequently and secretly allowed massive federal agencies, including ICE and the FBI, to access that locally collected data pool.
Without asking the local taxpayers who funded it.
Exactly. The fear articulated by privacy groups is that the private facial recognition networks expanding inside retail stores will follow the exact same trajectory: local, privately captured biometric data quietly feeding into a massive, unregulated federal dragnet.
And as if a nationwide network of retail cameras scanning our faces wasn't dystopian enough, the technology itself is rapidly evolving beyond simple identification. It is no longer just about matching a face to a name on a below list.
No, the AI is getting much smarter.
The AI is truly waking up. The ACLU source describes a product demonstration by a company called Vintro that I found genuinely terrifying. Can you walk us through exactly what happened in that San Jose demo?
It is a striking, very clear example of the future trajectory of this technology. An executive from Vintro was presenting at a conference, showing off their advanced video search capabilities. He took roughly a month's worth of raw video footage captured from about 10 standard fixed security cameras located at a busy transit center in San Jose, California.
Just standard CCTV footage.
Right. He fed the Vintro system a single photograph of a male target. The software instantly scrubbed through weeks of video and pulled up 23 separate snapshots of that specific man walking through the transit center at various times.
Which is an incredibly impressive and somewhat scary feat of rapid search on its own. But finding the guy wasn't the point of the demo. The executive then clicked a very specific button, right?
Yes, he clicked a feature button labeled Find Associates.
Find associates. Just think about what that implies.
He set a temporal parameter of 10 minutes. The AI system then went back into the footage and cross-analyzed everything. It identified 154 other distinct individuals who had appeared on camera within 10 minutes of the primary target.
Wow.
It was mapping out co-appearances. Now, in a busy transit center, most people only co-appeared near the target once. They were just strangers walking by. But the AI system filtered all of that out and flagged one specific man who had 14 distinct co-appearances with the target over the course of the month.
14 times. That is no longer a random coincidence in a train station. That indicates a relationship.
Exactly. The system instantly brought up the video clips displaying all 14 times the two men were together. The crucial takeaway here, as the ACLU notes, is that the AI didn't just track an individual's physical location. It autonomously analyzed massive amounts of metadata to uncover a hidden social connection.
It built a real-time web of social networks.
Yes. Based on their movement patterns, the algorithm could deduce if they were coworkers commuting together, or friends meeting for lunch, or romantic partners. The cameras are no longer just dumbly recording video to a hard drive. They are beginning to actively understand human relationships, mapping our social graphs automatically, without either person ever doing anything illegal.
So let's take a breath and look at the landscape we've mapped out. We have algorithms that are deeply mathematically biased against women and people of color. We have police departments using them to track political protesters and shill free speech. We have grocery stores building secret watch lists that feed into federal dragnets. And we have AI that is learning to automatically map out who we love, who we associate with, and who we work with.
It sounds like an unstoppable technological tidal wave.
But as the final section of our research explores, there is a massive, highly organized pushback happening right now. Citizens, civil rights groups, and lawmakers are scrambling to put the biometric genie back in the bottle.
The legislative pushback is real.
But the big question is it actually working? Let's survey the legislative landscape.
Globally, there is significant building momentum to heavily regulate or outright ban the use of this technology in public spaces. In Europe, the European Union's sweeping AI Act has drafted strong language that would severely restrict and in many cases completely ban the use of remote biometric identification, which covers real-time facial recognition in publicly accessible spaces by law enforcement, with very few narrow exceptions.
And what does the landscape look like in the United States?
In the U.S., because federal action is stalled, we are seeing the most aggressive action at the municipal and local levels. San Francisco made global headlines when it became the first major American city to outright ban its own government agencies and police from acquiring or using facial recognition software.
A huge precedent.
Since that watershed moment, at least 17 total U.S. municipalities have passed various forms of bans or severe restrictions.
So we are seeing cities taking action. But the sources suggest a deeper problem. The lawmakers who are supposed to be regulating this technology often don't actually understand how it works or how widely it's already being used. Didn't Privacy International conduct a survey in the UK that proved this?
Yes, Privacy International surveyed members of parliament in the UK, and the results were highly alarming from an oversight perspective.
What did they find?
70% of the MPs surveyed admitted they didn't even know if facial recognition technology was currently being deployed by police forces or private companies within their own constituencies.
70%. They didn't even know.
Furthermore, many of the MPs falsely assumed that existing data protection laws, specifically the GDPR, were legally sufficient to stop the unregulated use of the technology.
They thought the privacy laws already on the books would act as a shield, but as we've seen, general data laws really struggle to cover the specific, novel threats of biometric mass surveillance.
Exactly. They aren't tailored for biometrics.
And even when progressive cities DO successfully pass bans, we run into what investigative journalists at the markup call the loophole epidemic. If cities like San Francisco or Boston actually pass laws banning facial recognition, how are their local police departments still managing to use the technology?
Because the bans were drafted with massive structural loopholes. The reporting by the markup found that cities like Pittsburgh, Boston, and Northampton passed ordinances explicitly banning their own local police departments from spending money to acquire facial recognition software or running the software themselves.
Okay, that sounds like a ban.
It does. However, the laws did not explicitly prohibit those local officers from simply asking other agencies to run the biometric scans for them.
Oh my gosh. It's the ask a friend loophole. It's like a police chief saying, well, the city council banned me from looking in this digital file cabinet, but hey, state police, or hey, FBI, can you open the cabinet, look at the file, and just email me what it says?
Precisely. If a local detective in a banned city has a photo of a suspect, they can just email that photo to the state police, or a federal agency, or a regional fusion center that operates outside the city's jurisdiction and isn't covered by the local ban, and ask them to run the facial recognition search.
Did the markup find actual cases of this?
Oh, yes. They highlighted a specific case in San Francisco where the SFPD successfully bypassed their own city's historic ban by asking the NCRC, which is a regional intelligence center, to run a suspect's photo through their photo match software. The local police effectively outsourced the surveillance to get around the local law.
So if Boston and San Francisco are prime examples of how not to write a ban, what does a genuinely effective ban look like? The civil liberties sources point to Portland, Oregon as the absolute gold standard in the country. Why is Portland's law considered so much tougher than the rest?
Portland's legislation is groundbreaking because it doesn't just target government use. It attacks the problem from both sides. It explicitly bans the use of facial recognition technologies by city bureaus, and crucially, it bans its use by private businesses in places of public accommodation.
Meaning no grocery stores, no pharmacies, no hardware stores, no concert venues can use facial recognition on the public within the city limits.
Correct. It effectively shuts down the entire retail panopticon within Portland's jurisdiction. And we know exactly how impactful this private sector ban is because of the intense corporate pushback it generated.
Oh, I'm sure the tech companies fought back.
The sources note that Amazon spent roughly $12,000 lobbying local officials to fight against the Portland ordinance. That financial effort is proof of how desperate massive tech giants are to keep the lucrative private sector door open for their surveillance products.
The Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, actually analyzed all these different laws and laid out clear guidelines for lawmakers on what makes a strong, effective ban. What are the core pillars they recommend?
The EFF outlines three main pillars for robust legislation. First, the law must rely on broad, comprehensive definitions. It cannot just ban face identification. It must explicitly cover face tracking, face verification, and biometric analysis to ensure that tech companies don't just tweak the name of their software to slip through a linguistic loophole.
Right, and the second.
Second, there must be an explicit, ironclad ban on outsourcing. If the local police are banned from using it, the law must explicitly state they cannot request the FBI, the state police, or a private vendor to use it on their behalf.
Close the ask a friend loophole. And the third pillar, because from what I've read, this is the one that actually gives the law teeth.
The third pillar is the inclusion of a private right of action.
Explain what that means for the listener.
This is absolutely crucial for enforcement. It means that if a city agency or a private business violates the ban and scans your face illegally, you, as an ordinary citizen, have the explicit legal right to sue them directly in civil court for damages.
That's huge.
Without a private right of action, a ban is often just a symbolic, toothless gesture because it relies entirely on the government choosing to prosecute itself for breaking the rules. Giving citizens the power to sue is the ultimate enforcement mechanism.
Okay, we've covered an immense amount of ground today. We have traversed a lot of complex technical and legal territory. Let's do a quick, overarching recap of the journey we've been on together. We started by breaking down the basic geometry of how a convolutional neural network learns to detect a face using shadows and edges, and how it translates your physical features into an abstract mathematical vector.
We then rigorously examined the inherent systemic biases baked into those algorithms, demonstrating how flawed training data disproportionately fails women and people of color.
Leading to devastating, life-altering, real-world consequences like the false arrest of Robert Williams. We also unpack the sociological paradox that fixing the code might simply automate existing structural inequality.
We looked at the profound, chilling effect this technology has on our civil liberties, effectively ending the historical anonymity of the crowd.
We saw how it is being actively weaponized to track protesters globally, from the umbrella shields in Hong Kong to the terrifying military deployments in Myanmar.
We uncovered the secret, automated watch lists maintained by retail giants, exposing the law enforcement loopholes that threaten to create a nationwide biometric dragnet.
And we explored the terrifying potential of AI, like the Vintra system, to move beyond identification and automatically map our intimate social networks and relationships in real time.
And finally, we navigated the complex legislative game of whack-a-mole happening right now, looking at how cities are attempting to ban the tech, while police departments find clever loopholes to keep outsourcing the surveillance.
Now, as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final, highly provocative thought. Almost everything we have discussed today, the algorithms, the Balo lists, the false arrests, has been fundamentally about answering one question. Who are you? Matching a physical face to a legal name.
Right, identification.
But hidden deep in the reports from the EFF and EPIC is a chilling new concept regarding the next rapidly approaching generation of this technology. It's an emerging field called face inference, or face analysis.
Yes, this is a highly controversial, rapidly accelerating frontier of artificial intelligence.
Software developers are currently building algorithms that claim they can read your facial microexpressions. They are aggressively marketing software that claims it can infer your emotional state, analyze your mental health, determine your level of aggression, or even predict your political leanings strictly by analyzing the geometry and micro-movements of your face before you ever speak a single word or take a single action.
It is essentially a high-tech digital revival of phrenology, the thoroughly debunked 19th century pseudoscience that falsely claimed it could determine a person's character and criminal propensity simply by measuring the bumps on the shape of their skull.
Think about the massive implications of that leap. We are already struggling, globally, to properly regulate and contain technology that simply tries to ID us from a photograph. What happens when the cameras on the street claim they know what you are feeling? What happens when a black box algorithm decides you look mathematically suspicious or angry today and automatically flags you for police intervention before you've actually done anything at all?
It's a terrifying prospect.
If our face is already becoming the ultimate tracking device, are we unknowingly entering an era where a machine decides what you are going to do long before you actually do it? The next time you walk down the street, or the next time you step through the sliding glass doors of your local grocery store to grab that gallon of milk, take a brief moment to look up at the ceiling. Look at the little black domes, silently observing the aisles. And ask yourself, what exactly do those cameras think they know about you? The next time you walk down the street or the next time you step through the sliding glass doors of your local grocery store to grab that gallon of milk, take a brief moment to look up at the ceiling. Look at the little black domes silently observing the aisles. And ask yourself, thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.